Hi guys, I'm Noel Powell with Creation Effects, and I just finished a big update to Creation Lens Flares. Creation Lens Flares is a totally free tool for adding lens flares to your footage or motion designs in Adobe After Effects. You can download it now. It's at creationeffects.com, and I'll have the link in the description. So this is the official tutorial for using the template, but first let me talk a little bit about what it does. In a nutshell, this template is a collection of 50 unique lens flares that you can animate or customize with easy controls. Or if you prefer, you can build your own lens flare, and there's all kinds of effects that you can add to it to get different looks and different behaviors. There's a ton of customization options in this, but especially with this update, I've made it very easy to use, and I think anyone who ever uses After Effects is going to find it very useful for their projects. You do not want to be caught using one of the 3 built-in lens flare effects that come with After Effects. Those have been around since, I'm not sure exactly, but I think around the year 2000, and they haven't been updated, and they've always had a certain reputation. Designers don't like them, so just don't. Erase those from your memory. But this update is long overdue too. I first released it in 2012. I actually launched my company with it, and my logo was a lens flare, and I had lens flares all over my website. I was a lens flare nut. But it had some issues. It only worked in HD resolution, and the interface was kind of clunky. So a few years back, I decided it had a good run as a paid product, but I didn't want to charge for it anymore because it didn't meet my current standards. And then recently I was feeling guilty even for giving it away for free because it hadn't had an update in 11 years. So here is your update. It has 4K lens flares, and you can change that resolution to anything you need. It has a much cleaner, more compact interface, and it just works better. I actually redid all the expressions and rebuilt every lens flare from the ground up. So go to the link below and you can download it for free, and you'll find a bunch of other free tools and presets for After Effects there. And obviously I hope you'll poke around the website and see the other products, because all I've been doing for the last 12 years is sitting in this chair, making cool stuff in After Effects, and then making it so that anybody can customize it, and then selling it for really low prices. But let's get on with the tutorial. When you download the zip file, if you're on a PC, you'll right click it and choose the Extract All option, or on a Mac, just double click it. And you'll see a folder with this creationlensflares.aep file. So just open that up in After Effects. And if you already have a project that you're working on and you want to bring the lens flares into that project, what you can do is go to File and Import and File, and then find the Creation Lens Flares project and just import it, and the whole thing will show up in a nice little folder in your project panel. All right, so we're greeted with some instructions here, and I think most people are going to want to use one of the presets. So if you open this clip here, called Preset Previews, you can play that or just scrub through it. It just gives you a quick glimpse of what each preset looks like with the light source moving diagonally across the frame. So if you see one you like, you just note the name here, and then open one of these folders, depending on whether you're working in 4K or HD. And if you need some other resolution, just open the one that's closest to what you need. These folders have exactly the same stuff in them, so they're just different resolutions. The HD comps are going to run a lot quicker, so I'm going to use that. And I'll open this lens flare presets comp, and I'll hide this instructions layer. So this comp has all 50 presets. You can unhide any one to see it. It was kind of hard to categorize these, but I did my best. So these ones are all anamorphic flares. So those long horizontal streaks and sometimes really stretched reflections. Then down here are the most colorful ones, or flashy or stylized. A few of these are more abstract, like just different textures. And then up here in the middle, we have other, perhaps a little more standard lens flares, but each one very unique. So any of these layers can be copied and pasted to whatever comp you're working in. You can change the blending mode if you want. And you can animate it right here on the layer. If you look in your effect controls panel, you'll see some customization controls. So you've got your position control, and if you select this pseudo effect here, you'll see the little crosshair, and you can drag it around. So you can keyframe this or motion track it to your footage. Next, we have a brightness control. Going down to 0 will completely hide the lens flare. But it's different from just lowering the opacity. Some elements are dimming, some are getting smaller or less intense, but you'll always have this white light here on the light source. So you'll see in a moment how this lens flare is made up of lots of different layers. And this next control, the global scale, affects the scale of all of those layers together. So this is really handy for scaling things down and getting a more detailed look. But keep in mind that this is lossy, so you might not want to scale it up too much. And the cool thing about these controls is that when you bring them down to 0, all the elements will adjust themselves proportionally. So even though they might all be different sizes or set to a different scale setting, they all shrink down together to 0 as you turn the scale control down to 0. And then we have flatten and stretch, which affects the X and Y scale of each layer, so you can stretch out all the elements to get an anamorphic look. Normally these elements would stretch horizontally, but I've set these ones to auto-orient to the light source, so they'll always rotate themselves to face the light. And you can manually add rotation to all the layers by turning this last rotate control. That could be an interesting look. So those are the global controls. They affect all of the elements or all the layers of the lens flare together. And then we have the global reflections controls, which affect just the reflections. So this is the light source, and the reflections are all of this stuff down here. Everything that's not attached to the light source, generally. The reason I separated the controls like that is because you might want a light source that's really big or really small and still have control over the brightness or scale of this other stuff. So we have a lot of the same controls as above. We've got brightness and scale, which again, that's the layer scale. Then next we have expansion, which on some elements appears to have the same effect as scale, but it works a little differently. This one is not lossy, so it expands a mask sometimes, or it scales up a shape. It can have a totally different effect on different elements. So you'll want to play with both the scale and the expansion. Reflections proximity, that one slides all the reflections closer or further from the light source. And reflection scatter, that one generally spreads out all the reflections outward from the center of the comp. And add sides to reflection shape, you're never going to use that. I don't know why I put that in there. All right, so if you want more control, maybe you want to get rid of some elements to make it more simple, or maybe there's some element in the lens flare that's distracting and you want to dim it, or maybe you want to add an element. Just double click the layer and that will open up the pre-comp for that lens flare. And if you're a user of the old version, this will look familiar to you. We've got all these lens flare elements in here, and we've got our control layer here at the top, which if we select that, this circle appears, and we can drag that circle around to move our lens flare. And on the control layer, we have those same global controls and reflection controls, which affect all the elements together. And if you select any individual element, you'll find a bunch more controls for customizing just that element. The most notable difference with this comp now is the old version used individual slider controls for each control, and they took up a lot of space and you had to scroll forever. Now they use these pseudo effects, and they're neat and compact and organized. Also, if you want to change the resolution of this lens flare, you can do that now. Just go to the composition settings and enter your resolution. And then you may need to change the resolution of a few solid layers. So click up here where it says layer name and switch it to say source name. And now we can see the resolution of our solid layers. So these are 2000 by 2000 pixels. These are 3000. I think these are fine. You won't need to ever increase these unless you're seeing the element get cut off at the edge of a layer. But these layers that say HD, or if you're in a 4K comp, they'll say 4K, those you'll want to change to match the resolution of your comp. So just make sure the layer is selected and then go to Layer and Solid Settings and do Make Comp Size. So do that for each of them and then you're ready to go. So you can animate your lens flare in this comp if you want, or just use the layer from the lens flare presets comp that we looked at. It doesn't really matter. If you're using this comp, you just keyframe the position of this control layer to move the lens flare. And of course, you can keyframe any of the customization controls on any of the layers as well. All right, let me talk about building your own lens flare. You can do that in this base comp here in the Make Your Own folder. I'll hide the instructions. And there's already a control layer in here and a couple of elements to get you started, which you can delete if you want. But to add your own elements, you'll just copy and paste them from the Elements comp here. This has 19 different elements, and I'm not going to go over every one of them because you can play around with them yourself. And also I've got instructions for all of them inside the layer comments. So you can stretch this out and expand this and then read all about that element. But I do want to show you a few of these, and there are several things to note about how to customize them. So these yellow ones are light source elements. They are attached to the light source and they move with the light source. And by default, they are not affected by the global reflections controls up here. All the orange layers here are reflections and they do accept the global reflection controls. Now, I'll unhide a few of these light source elements. Any one of these can be a reflection element. You just toggle this little switch here, allow global reflection control. And you can even move them away from the light source like this using this proximity control. So you can move it over here, and now when you move the control layer around, the light source goes one way and the reflection does the opposite. And if I go back to my global reflections controls on the control layer, I can adjust those reflections by themselves without affecting the shape or brightness of the light source. Or I could always come down here and adjust those elements individually using the local controls. So let's talk about those local controls for a moment. Some of these are found on every element, like you'll always have a brightness control and softness to blur it. And most of them have an expansion control, which, if you remember, expands the element in a non-lossy way, or it shrinks it. And also on each element, you'll find these layer transform controls. So these all affect the scale or position or rotation of the layer. I already adjusted the proximity of this element, but watch what happens if I offset it using this vertical offset control. So now it still mirrors the movement of the light source, but in a different way. Another group of controls you'll see on several elements are these completion controls. If I just want to show a part, like maybe a sliver of this element, I can turn up the completion amount and feather it out a bit. And now the area that's cropped is going to automatically face the light source, no matter where the element is. Okay, like I mentioned, to get any of these into your base comp, you just copy and paste the layer. But note that a couple of these layers have an alpha matte layer or a luma matte layer. So they share the same name as the element, and but they also say alpha matte or luma matte. So just be sure to copy both layers over if you want to use that element. And the matte layer should always remain hidden. You don't want to see them. All right, this evolving texture layer, I should probably explain that real quick because if you unhide it, this is what you're going to see. What is that? Well, the instructions here, they tell you to draw a mask on the layer. So you might grab your mask tool and do something like this and this, wherever you want to see a reflection. And now we have those little blocky reflections you may have noticed before that are often seen in lens flares. And you can change the fractal type of the fractal noise effect if you want and just get a huge variety of looks. And what's cool is that the texture will move or evolve as you move the lens flare. So that's another type of control that you'll see throughout the template. Whenever you see a control named something evolution, like this scale width evolution, that determines how much the scale width property will increase or decrease as the layer gets further away from the center of the comp. So if you're an After Effects user, you probably know where that property is found. Let's open up that fractal noise effect. And here's the scale width property. So this determines the width of our texture. So when the element is in the center of the comp, which you can see our light source and all the elements are in the center right now, this value is not going to be affected by our evolution control. It's just going to be whatever we set this property to here inside the effect. Or in this case, I put this control up here for the scale width. So this is what the property will be when we're in the center of the comp. But watch what happens when we move the light source away from the center. Watch this value. It increased, and it just gets higher and higher the further away we are from the center. Or I can go back here and I can set the scale width evolution to a negative value, and now the value has decreased from whatever it was at the center. So you'll encounter evolution controls a lot, and it's a good way to program movement and changes in shape and all kinds of changes in your elements so that they're not just static shapes that float across the frame. All right, further down, we have this really basic reflection shape. You can see that it's a shape layer. You can expand it all you want because it's vector-based. You can auto-orient it if you want so that it's always rotated toward the center of the comp. Or maybe if you have it up here and you want all your elements to orient to the light source, you can set it to light source. And here's a tip. To make this a circle, there is a sides control here where you can choose the number of sides that you can make a triangle or a square or octagon, whatever. But you could crank this up also to make a circle, but a better way is just to use this outer roundness control and just set it to 130 to make a perfect circle. Now, the reflection shape is great if you want to do something specific with just that reflection. But if you want a whole line of 50 shapes or 100 shapes, don't duplicate that layer a bunch of times. That'd be silly, and you're better than that. So just use this reflection shape array element. It's got something like 10 shapes on here. Yeah, 10, and you can duplicate them to make more. But the easier way to make more, I have these radial shadow effects, and those effects make duplicates of all of them. And they make them a different size and a different blurriness and a different opacity, a different position. So you can unhide as many of these effects as you need. And you can control the amount of variation in those duplicates using these array controls up here. And you can adjust their position for each radial shadow effect here in the individual shadow controls. An alternative to reflection shape array element is this reflection particles array. It's a similar look, but it behaves a little differently. It's made from the CC particle world effect, and you'll have less control over the reflections, but you can change the particle type in here, and it's got this nice 3D rotation effect as you move the light source. Next is this reflection solid, which is another very basic element, but the cool thing about it is you can make your own shapes using a mask. So in a lot of the presets, I made some really detailed kind of weird shapes. I was imitating shapes that I saw in real lens flare footage. So you don't even have to make them. They're already made. If you just want to copy them from one of the presets, you can do that. And this last one is just an alpha matte layer. It should stay off. So I think I'll put this further away like this. And I'll put my textured reflection solid. This is the same as the reflection solid we just looked at, but it has a texture. And I'll put it over here and expand it. And now I'll set the track matte to my alpha matte layer. And now my reflection is cut off. And as I move the lens flare, its shape changes as the alpha matte moves. Okay, there's a lot of other good stuff in here, so play with them all if you're interested in designing your own lens flares. It can be a lot of fun. I said there are a lot of customization options, and if you're not overwhelmed yet, that's okay. There's still hope. I've got some more options to show you. And it is all optional. If you want to take the easy route, just go with the presets. That's totally fine. But if you want to make original lens flares that evolve and, they look organic and real, then take a look at these other comps. First, I'll show you these lens textures. And here we've got all kinds of dust and smudges and fingerprints, the stuff you'd see on a lens. And we have this alpha matte layer here. It's really big and it fades out. And this is attached to the light source. So as you move the lens flare around, it reveals the lens texture and it adds a lot of realism to the lens flare, if that's what you're going for. So just copy the lens flare texture image that you want along with the alpha matte layer and paste them both into your base comp. Okay, let's do effects library next. And here we've got a bunch of copy and paste effects. You just copy them to any element and it will change their look or behavior. I've got the ones that I thought were most useful first, and the less useful ones are at the bottom. So all of these effects are applied to a basic hexagon in this comp, a reflection shape element. Depending on what element you add them to, they can have a very different effect, but applied to this simple shape, it helps you see kind of what the effect does. If I unhide this first one, so this is what you'll see on each of these layers. You'll have a title control here, and then some customization controls, and then the actual effect. So you'll want to copy the title control and everything below it, and then go to your element and just paste them, and they'll show up at the bottom. So let's look at a few of these. The first one, CC Spotlight, this works just like having an alpha matte layer, but we're doing it with an effect. So it makes the element fade out automatically as it gets further from the center. If we want to see the spotlight, we can expand the shape way up, and now we see our circle that's acting like an alpha matte. So for our controls, we have a couple proximity controls. Most effects in After Effects have some kind of position property that determines where the position or center of the effect is. So this one's a little unusual because it actually has two. But if we select the effect, we can see where those positions are by these little crosshairs. And they're both right at the center, so this spotlight is barely moving. But if we adjust this proximity effect, I'll bring them both up to like 35. Now when we select the effect, you can see the crosshairs are closer to the light source. And the whole spotlight moves like a reflection now as we move the light source. So I'll scale this back down. And now the effect follows us for longer, allowing us to fade out the element more gradually. And you can change the size of the spotlight and softness and all that stuff inside the effect. All right, I should show you one with evolution controls. So this next one, radial wipe effect, this is the same effect as the completion controls that we looked at earlier. It cuts out a sliver, or it cuts out part of the element. This one doesn't have a proximity control, but it has these evolution controls. So remember those? Those make a property increase or decrease as the element moves away from the center. And this effect might look better on a light rays element. A few other useful ones, fractal noise. This adds a texture which you can customize in the fractal noise effect. and then make the texture change automatically or evolve as the lens flare moves. CC lens, that's a fun one. And transform, make any element change shape as it moves, like grow bigger or smaller or stretch or rotate or fade out its opacity. CC flow motion, that has a cool, almost liquidy effect. So you can experiment with those. Let's look at this, expression library comp. This is the last comp I want to show you. These are a collection of expressions that you can copy and paste to any property or any control on your elements. So it's a way to program your lens flare to do whatever you want automatically as it moves. You can see these are actually text layers, so if you unhide any of them, you get a written explanation of what the expression does. The one I use the most is this first one, basic time or motion evolution. And this is just the same evolution stuff that I've been talking about. It'll make any control you put it on increase or decrease in value as the element moves away or toward the center of the comp. So here's a simple example of when you could use that. Let's say you want your lens flare to dim automatically as it moves off frame. You could keyframe the brightness control, but what if the lens flare is going to come back in the frame or it's moving all around? It would just be easier to make it automatic. So you go to this basic time or motion evolution layer and you copy the controls on there. Then go to your lens flare and I'll paste the controls onto the control layer because the control that I want to have the expression on is on this layer. You would put it on whatever layer you're going to be affecting. Now I just need the expressions. So I'll go back to the expression library comp, and the expressions are in the layer comments of each layer. So just select the text by clicking once on it, copy it, and I'll go back to my lens flare, and I'll alt-click the stopwatch icon for the global brightness control, which will open the expression box for that control, and I'll just paste the expression in there. And then take a look at the controls. We have a start evolution control, which is the distance in pixels from the center of the comp where you want the evolution to start. I want the lens flare to dim right around here at the edge of the comp. And I know this comp is HD, so I know that's 960 pixels from the center. So I'll put in 960, and I want the brightness to decrease as it moves further past that. So I'll use a negative value. I'll put about -80. You'll have to experiment with the amount to see what works best. And now let's see what happens when I move the lens flare out of frame. It dims gradually and automatically, and as I bring it back into frame, it brightens again. This next control is time evolution, and that will let you make the value just continue to increase or decrease on its own, regardless of whether the lens flare is moving or not. And I never used it once, not once, and you probably won't either. But it was too much work to take out, so it's there. And the last checkbox here, if you copy this expression and paste it onto a reflection element, it's going to look at the position of that element, of that layer, to start its evolution at the right moment. If you check this box, it will look at the position of the light source instead. So those controls are pretty standard for all the expressions in the expression library. And you can put this expression anywhere. I used it a lot on the expansion control for reflection shape arrays so that all the reflections will decrease in size as the lens flare moves away. Let's talk quickly about these other ones. Single axis evolution, it's similar, but instead of looking at its distance from the center, it's linked to either its Y position or its X position. So that value increases or decreases as it moves further right or further down, starting from the top left corner. So this creates a more random looking change in the value. And also it's nice because the value won't change directions as the element crosses over the center of the comp, which can be useful. The next one, wiggle with markers, lets you add a wiggle or a random fluctuation to a value. And it only starts when the element is within a certain range or distance from the center. And you can see there are a few more expressions there. I'm not going to go over those, but you can just unhide any layer to read what the expression does. So that's creation lens flares. I originally made 10 different tutorials when I first released this template, and they covered all the different features, and it was ridiculous and unnecessary. So you got the compact tutorial. Hopefully it's everything you need, but there are a lot of written instructions inside if you need more info. And I'll keep links up on the webpage to those old tutorials if you want to have a look at those. But they might be a little out of date because I've changed quite a bit. And the link to the webpage is down below if you haven't downloaded it yet. And you might as well download the other free effects while you're there. And be sure to check out the really good stuff, like the latest template, which is called Landscaper. It lets you create 3D landscape animations in After Effects, and you can make any kind of landscape you want, like forests, deserts, beaches, grasslands, winterscapes, jungles, fantasy landscapes, and a lot more. It comes with 1,000 landscape elements to build your scenes with, but as you might have gathered already, I'm pretty big on presets. So if you don't have time to build your own, I included 30 presets or 30 finished landscapes, which are the ones you're seeing now. So you can put a 3D title or logo in these scenes and animate your camera to move through it. A few really cool features of this template is you can easily add water to your scene simply by drawing the lake or shoreline with a pen tool. Also, it has an automatic lighting feature so that you can adjust the time of day and see your scene at any time of day, like sunset or nighttime or daytime. Or you can make time lapses just by keyframing a single control. And it comes with a bunch of cool effects like wind and fog, waterfalls, shooting stars, rainbows, and a whole lot more. So I'll leave a link below and you can go watch the demo for that. Also, another recent one is Creation Trippy Effects, which has a bunch of custom trippy looks for your footage, as well as a bunch of custom trippy or psychedelic animations, like endless fractals and mesmerizing tunnels. Some other popular templates are the Critter Collection series, so you can animate realistic swarms of insects for your videos, or create custom flocks of birds, or make custom schools of fish. Micro is a template that lets you create realistic microscopic animations, so imitating organisms as seen from the microscope. And then there's Infinite Horizon for creating custom 3D perspective bending scenes from your landscape footage. And then Creation Artifacts lets you turn your footage into animated artwork in over 40 different artistic mediums. And there's a lot more there to see. Everything is easy to customize. You don't have to be an After Effects expert. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the lens flares. Subscribe so that you can stay on top of new releases, and I plan on making a lot more free stuff. So look out for that, and I'm done. I'll see you in the next video.